Stop telling people to switch to Linux. This whole idea that people can switch to Linux is utter nonsense. It seems to be a very trendy thing at the moment. Some people do this in a respectable manner, while others take things a bit too far, and I am complaining about those creators who go too far and think Linux is king. I mean, yes, it certainly does have its advantages, but you know what? It also has its own downsides, of course, as goes every operating system in existence, each to their own and each have their own flaws and drawbacks. That's to be expected. Linux, for starters, is a more technically advanced operating system that is based on the Linux kernel, which is what's also used as the underlying base for Android and Chrome OS. Linux is capable of accomplishing lots of more advanced things that are not doable on Windows or Mac OS. Take a system like Kali Linux for example. This is a hacker's favorite toy to play with, as he or her can do lots of devastating damage to one's OS, through some very specialized tools, that are specific to that distro of Linux, and there are also distros such as Tails OS, Cubes OS, or Unix, that try to give you as much anonymity as possible. However, you can never be 100% invisible in this online world. Linux comes with a great and steep learning curve that most are not prepared to deal with, so this is why it is failing to gain momentum in the desktop market, where home users, and businesses, are the ones using Windows or Mac OS, and these people are the ones who have exclusive access to proprietary software, that Linux and users of other Unix-like systems don't have access to, because for one, Linux and the FOSS systems are purely based on an open-source philosophy, and paid-for software goes against certain aspects of the FOSS philosophy. Linux also struggles because it is fraught with hardware and software support, or lack thereof, therefore making it a nightmare to get some hardware working correctly on Linux, and business standard software is generally not available for Linux. Take Microsoft Office and Adobe Photoshop for example, this is not natively available for Linux, or BSD, or any other system except Windows and Mac OS, but a free alternative called GIMP is an excellent free open source solution. Check out my videos on GIMP to learn more about it. Linux is also struggling to gain widespread use because it is not proactively being sold to the end user on their computers. However, most people are probably unaware that when they use Android or Chrome OS, that they are using a Linux-based OS, and this is also a contributing factor to why Linux will not see widespread adoption, even with the end of support for Windows 10. Windows is substandard garbage, but arguably the easiest to use, and by far the most used OS worldwide. Is it any wonder a plethora of software is written for Windows? No, it is not, and with that large library of software comes the inevitable crowd of people wanting a PC, not a Linux computer. Linux is rarely ever actually sold. The only notable cases were when Dell, HP, Lenovo, etc., were selling laptops, desktops, and notebooks with Ubuntu Linux. This occurred around 2014, but it was a miserable flop and they shortly ceased selling Ubuntu Linux on laptops and PCs soon after, although a German company known as Tuxedo has seemed to have proved a point. They make their own laptops and desktops that run Linux, and some systems are tailored towards gaming or content creation. How nice is that? Tuxedo can ship their computers to pretty much anywhere in the world where trade is free and open, in other words, not under a trade embargo, or being cut off from the rest of the world, and they are pretty cheap compared to your average Windows PC. Despite this, Linux still stagnates, or grows slowly. The market share for desktop Linux is constantly fluctuating, and this is due to migrating users from Windows and Mac OS, as well as a small number of potential business users. The only area where Linux is dominant is the server industry, which is an entirely different sector of computing altogether. The Linux community also has a big role to play in helping those wanting to transition from Windows or Mac OS. They need to help us become aware of the benefits, downsides, and what's involved when setting up Linux for the first time, as well as getting used to using free open source software. And a good chunk of you might struggle to accomplish that, but this is the trade-off you make for using a free and open source OS like Linux. This being said, you can run your proprietary software with certain tools, although I personally think this is not worth bothering with, as finding Linux native software that can basically accomplish the same task is often a better choice. The Linux community also needs to help us become increasingly aware of the complexity surrounding Linux, as it is a technically advanced OS that only geeks and nerds can really use, and the enthusiasts use it to repurpose older machines. Perhaps that older hardware no longer runs a supported version of Windows. This is a perfect case for Linux to be of use to that user, and if it's a secondary PC, perhaps experimenting with Linux before switching to it should be greatly encouraged before people go telling other people to switch to Linux. Listen to the experts like BritEcho9, he knows what he is talking about. Heck, even I know what I am talking about. So you should take our advice, or should I say, the experts' advice, on what you should do before switching to Linux. We can encourage people to switch to Linux, but do be mindful that you are preaching to the converting, and the converting only. You will not convince people who are happy using Windows or Mac OS, or cannot use technology properly, obviously. Windows is shit, but Linux is too hard for the average Joe. And, most people do not care enough about the OS nor their privacy to consider using Linux. In fact, most cannot even click with the idea of FOSS software being better than proprietary software, so this also contributes to the arrogance for most people, if they are even aware of it, to switch. You know, not everyone is tech literate, and my goal is to help those of you who are less tech savvy. I am here to guide you to the right things, whether you're in need of a Linux migration guide, or you want to find a free equivalent to FOSS software, we've got you covered, and we also like to encourage you to give your advice or opinions on certain topics. You are always welcome to comment on any of my videos, and it is greatly encouraged that you comment on my videos. I also think that if we want more people to switch to Linux, we should acknowledge that not everyone is prepared to change, or for change, so if that's the case, you cannot convince everyone or anyone to switch to Linux, and the main reason is because there must be a compelling reason to switch to Linux, and if there is no compelling reason, then most people are not even going to bother even looking at it, or trying it out, and you have to accept that. Linux content creators, I know I also come across as a Linux content creator, but I am not just about Linux, I cover a whole range of things, so I am not just a Linux content creator. Sure, I love to create content surrounding Linux, but I always put the truth first and foremost, so you are never misled by any disinformation or misleading information. The info I get is always factual, and I often sum up pretty good opinions based on those facts. I would assume the majority of my viewers also read up on tech news. Correct me if I am wrong. Anyway, it is now time to wrap up this video. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you next video. Bye for now.